Good day, fellow champions of inclusion. I am AA Ron, and this is the Inclusive Dad Podcast, where we explore inclusion and make it practical. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe, rate, or review the show on your favorite platform. We truly appreciate your feedback and would be honored if you shared the podcast with friends and family who might benefit. If you want to support us in our mission, please click on the link in the show description. Today, my guest is Jeaneen Tang. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Aaron.
Yeah. Why don't you start off by just telling me a little bit about yourself?
Great. So I am a speech language pathologist. I graduated in 2001, so I've been doing this for 23 years now, and I love this career. But I wouldn't have found it unless I had, someone had mentioned it. I wanted to do something to help people, to either be a teacher or maybe a physical therapist. But someone said, well, you did competitive high school and college speech. So maybe speech therapy. So I did that, and I love it. And early on, I never thought I would I wasn't sure if I wanted to have kids, but when I was 35, your clock is ticking, and we decided to try and have a child, and we did. And in 2012, our son Che was born, and then I became a mom. And in 2013, unfortunately, he had a traumatic fall from, our bed, and he had a brain injury with a large brain bleed and had to have an emergency craniotomy. And a few days later, that swelling created a stroke, which means that he doesn't use it affected the left side of his brain. So it affects the right side of his body. So he doesn't use his right arm or hand and functionally at all. And he still has some balance issues. And a few years ago, he started having seizures. So, I say I'm a speech therapist. I'm a part-time speech therapist because I don't work full-time. I want to work as many hours as possible, but still spend time with my son.
Yeah.
I'm a full-time mom, and, I'm a hobby athlete. I love pickleball and volleyball and love to be active. And, I've coach my son's basketball team. So there's a lot of things that I do, and in a nutshell, and I recently wrote a book, so now I'm an author.
That's great. I have two children. My son was born in 2000 and, actually 2 months to the day before 9/11. And then my daughter Cece was born 15 months later. At 3 months old, we found out she was having seizures, so diagnosed with epilepsy, then cerebral palsy. We never found out what caused the seizures. They did scans, and there was stuff showed up on the brain scan. So they told us there was a stroke at some point. Her pregnancy and everything was normal, nothing that we could tell when it happened. So we just never found out. But they said that she had a stroke as well. So cerebral palsy, epilepsy. So her left side she can use it, but it's not as functional as her right side. Like her right hand, her left one is not as functional as her right hand. But so she uses a wheelchair, has had speech therapy in the past. She's somewhat, I would say, somewhat nonverbal. I can understand her pretty well. If you just meet her, it's harder. But so we're familiar with speech therapy. She qualified under multiple categories for an IEP, so we always had a speech person on the team, so I'm familiar with that. So that's a great. So you had already been doing the speech therapy when your son was born, is that correct?
Yes. So I was a speech therapist since 2001, and then he was born in 2012. And fortunately, because he needed speech therapy, obviously, because I was so aware of it, I was already working in early intervention, which is 0 to 3 years old, that I knew that right away, as soon as we left the hospital, we needed to have therapy in place. Right. And, we lived in the hospital for 3 months because he needed intensive rehab and he needed to heal. So we were there for, Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's of 2013, entering 2014. And when we got home, our area is in Los Angeles is early interventions run by the regional centers. And we had all the therapies in place. And it was so helpful because, I'm a therapist, but his dad is not a therapist and other family members are not therapists. So it was really important to have specialists come in to help to train us and help train the family
Sure.
and work with Che as much as possible.
So do you think like you having some background in like the early intervention, like how did that help you on your journey, you think?
I think it helped me tremendously because I knew the value in early intervention
Hmm.
and I knew the importance of getting therapy right away and to work at whatever skills he needed
Hmm.
intensely because if you take a child or a person who has an injury or a stroke or whatever the injury is and you don't work with them on
Hmm.
rehabilitating, then the chances of them making gains is so much less, right?
Right.
So you want to make sure that you attack it as soon as you can and just stimulate and language bombard and talk to him
Hmm.
and teach him all these things that he needs to learn.
Yeah. Yeah, my background is I didn't have any, I don't recall growing up like hearing the word disability, being around anybody in a wheelchair, any um, familiarity with it. So when my daughter was diagnosed with epilepsy, cerebral palsy, opened up that early intervention world to us. I didn't know any of it, so I just was kind of trusting the school specialists and doctors just to kind of give me the information that I needed, and so that kind of led us down the path of sending her to like a special education classroom across town when her brother just walked to school, and then found out about inclusion, so tried to get her back into gen ed. So I didn't have like you're saying you're kind of already familiar with some of it. I was not at all, so it was a completely different, like a parallel universe I call it sometimes, that all this stuff out there that I didn't even know existed, which I'm glad it did. It's just I was not familiar with it at all, so it was important for sure to have the specialists come in and learn from them and what we can do at home that also helps her. So that all makes a lot of sense to me. Yeah, that's great.
Absolutely. But even though I would have, like, yes, I had this knowledge,
Yeah.
and that's knowledge that all parents should be taught, right?
Yeah.
Encouraged to learn. But even though I had the knowledge of it, going from early intervention to school age,
Yeah.
you have that initial IEP, to go
Hmm.
into
Yeah.
preschool. And the IEP team, they all knew I was a speech therapist. They knew I worked in the schools in Hawaii and Los
Hmm.
Angeles.
Sure.
They knew all of this. And even though they knew that, they still tried to lowball him on time. They tried to cut back on services that he needed. And because, they're so overwhelmed with the amount
Yeah.
of kids that need
Yep.
services, they try to lowball it when they can. And I was like, well, this is not appropriate. And we had to get an advocate attorney to
Hmm.
help us. And even though I knew IEPs, I didn't have the, the legal jargon to spit back
Right.
at them.
Yeah.
And so you have to have somebody in your corner. And thankfully, the regional center here had free advocacy
Sure.
available to us because advocates can cost a lot of money
Yep.
and it's not something that everybody has access to.
Yeah. That is very interesting. I mean, I guess it doesn't really surprise me because part of what I do besides the podcast is I am an advocate as well. I do a little bit of that and help families, but I was always heavily involved in the IEP stuff. Learned a lot of things. Went to all the meetings, and they still, like you're saying, they knew you were a speech language pathologist, and they still, it didn't go as like you thought it should, or the minutes weren't whatever. But they still tried stuff with us too, where it's like, I'm going to ask questions, and they know that, and they still is like, how is this even happening right now? But yeah, so it's interesting. But yeah, advocates are I mean I kind of have a feeling like we would have IEP meetings with, since she qualified in so many things, like have 10 people across the table from us. So just her mom and me on our side, and then that many school staff, it just automatically sets the power imbalance feels there's a power imbalance there. So it's just, I kind of always encourage, if you want to have somebody come with, you can have somebody come with to the meeting, just listen, because I know our daughter, she has epilepsy, so we would take some people with us to doctor appointments sometime, just make sure that maybe we miss something because there's so much getting thrown at you. So that's another positive about having somebody come with you is they can maybe take notes, or if you talk ahead of time to prepare what you have questions about, just to make sure everything's getting answered. So yeah, advocates are great. It's
Yeah,
awesome.
I'm very, very thankful that we had some great
Yeah,
advocates in our corner because it's such a difficult path to
yeah,
navigate when you don't have someone who's knowledgeable in
right,
that legal jargon and what you are entitled to and
yeah,
how to get that.
for sure. Wow, what is your book about?
So my book is called Play, Dumb and Sabotage. And the subtitle helps to explain that a little bit is to mindfully under anticipate a child's needs and create opportunities to practice language. So, play dumb and sabotage is a term I've used for many years with
Mm-hmm.
parents and caregivers and teachers because as parents, we over anticipate what our child needs because we're like, what do they need? Are they hot? Are they cold? Are they hungry? Are they wet? Do they
Okay.
want to play with something? So we know what they want, right? So you say, you know what your daughter is saying,
Yep.
right? Because you know her and you can think like, oh, she probably wants this or that. But to an unfamiliar listener, she's unintelligible or she cannot communicate as effectively,
Yep.
right? So as parents and caregivers and as educators who know our children so well, we go, oh, they probably want to eat this. They probably want to wear this. They probably want to play with this toy. So we give them all these things and we're doing so much for them that the child themselves doesn't have the opportunity to naturally interact with their environment or naturally indicate what they need and what they want.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes, like my son is 12, but he'll still like hand me his cup. I'm like, well, what did you want? Let's use your words. Or I'll
Right.
be like, oh yeah, that's a cup. I'll still play dumb with him because he's kind
Okay.
of at that tween age where he's kind of forgotten how to use his words and use his manners. And I'm like, dude, you need
Mm-hmm.
to use your words and tell me specifically what you want. The grunts don't work. So a lot of times when a child is just gesturing or grunting or vocalizing as parents that who know them well, we know
Right.
what they want and just kind
Yep.
of tend to their needs rather than have that natural communication about like, oh, did you need something? What was that? Or they'd be like, cracker. I'm be like, oh, yep, that's a cracker. Like I love crackers and I'll eat it, whatever it is. Like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, did you want a cracker? Oh, you can say cracker, please. Or I want cracker. And
Right.
then to play dumb, that little natural kind of interaction where they're like, oh, I need to say more than what I'm just doing.
Right.
I need to do more than just gesture. I need to do more than just vocalize and have them be an actual active participant in that communication exchange. And then sabotage is just creating those opportunities to practice those exchanges because like anything, if you're a basketball player and you want to do free throws, you're not just going to shoot a free throw every now and then. You're going to practice it and have that
Right.
repetition because repetition helps you create mastery, right? And
Right.
so if you have a simple example is when you have snack time, you give the child, two goldfish rather than the whole bowl, and you have the goldfish bowl nearby, but out of reach. They can see it, they can indicate that they want more rather than, here you go, here's a free for all. I know you
Mm-hmm.
want the goldfish, have it. Or here's a whole glass of juice, have it. Give them a little bit so they can indicate they want more, right? Or if there's a toy that they love, you can have it in sight but out of reach.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you're doing bubbles, bubbles are great because once you blow the bubbles are gone, right? You have to ask for more in order to have the bubbles happen again.
Right.
So it's finding these opportunities to
Right.
sabotage. And then also you might do something like I used to put my son's pants on my head when I was getting him dressed in the morning because that's really playing
Mm-hmm.
dumb, right? And then it's
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, this is not how you're supposed to wear pants. Like, what are you supposed to do? So creating an opportunity for them to have a little aha or question moment
Right.
and interact naturally that way. So
Yeah.
the book itself, I wanted to, I'm only one person. I cannot
Yeah.
duplicate myself, but I
Yep.
can duplicate the information that I have. And I wrote the book to be able to be a handbook and a conversation with anybody that picks it up, whether you are a parent, caregiver, you're a teacher, someone who's an auntie or an uncle. You
Yep.
can pick it up, read it. It's very easy to read, very, very simple. And there's these functional strategies that you can apply to your daily life with your child or the children you interact with.
Hmm.
And at the end of every chapter, there's an interactive moments. So,
Sure.
one of my chapters is don't ask a yes no question unless you're ready to honor that no, right?
Yeah.
So we've all been there, like, oh, are you hungry? Yes, you want to know that answer, but oh, are you ready to clean up? Right? And the child says no. Or are you ready to go to bed? They say no.
Right.
Are you ready to do some homework? They say no, right? So if you're asking a yes no question, they say no. If you don't honor that no, then you're losing a little bit of their trust,
Right.
right? Like,
Right.
what does their no really mean if you're not going to honor it? So,
Hmm.
if you don't want them to say no, simple things you could ask is, like for my son, I'm saying, okay, let's get ready for bed. Do you want to brush your teeth first or change into pajamas first? Okay, so give him
Right.
choices. Or if when he was little, I would ask him, oh, what shirt do you want to wear? Do you want to wear the red shirt or the blue shirt? And I would hold it about shoulder width apart. So even if he can't speak, he can look at one of them and be like, oh, yeah, great. Let's wear the blue shirt. I love blue.
Hmm.
Like, blue's my favorite color. Blue's the color of the sky. And you can also kind of keep that conversation going.
Yeah.
So it's like creating opportunities where you could practice language, and at the end of that chapter, it asks you, okay, now you write some questions, or not, you
Hmm.
write some questions that are not yes no, offering choices. Or I might say, I might ask a sequence question like, oh, we're going to read a book and do a puzzle. Which one do you want to do first? So
Yeah.
at the end of the chapter, it gives opportunities for the reader to start writing these kinds of questions and statements and opportunities themselves.
That's great. Is that is that stuff you just kind of came up with on your own, or is that what you like learned going to school to be a speech language pathologist?
I think it's things I've learned along the way,
Okay.
because a lot of the things that you learn in textbooks
Hmm.
aren't really what you apply in therapy. Does that make sense? You
Yeah, it
learn
makes sense.
the academia, right? You learn
Yep.
what the structure
Hmm.
of how you make speech. You learn the chronological milestones that the child needs to
Sure.
make, but the strategies working with children are so hands-on that I've picked this stuff up with my mentor when
Hmm.
I was learning as a new therapist, and things I've thought of along the way. Like
Yeah.
one of the chapters about tapping out or clapping out syllables, because with maybe your daughter or somebody who's unintelligible, they might kind of slur together their
Yep.
words, or they
Hmm.
might slur together the words in a sentence. But if you clap a sentence out based on the syllables, it helps to kind of break up the words and make them
Sure.
more intelligible. And when you add in the music component, right? So clapping and tapping, I relate to music.
Hmm.
And as you know, music and, well, maybe you don't know, the music is from the right side of the brain, and the language part is on the left side of the brain.
Okay.
So when we add those two things together, using crossing that
Sure.
midline of the brain, it helps to solidify what is being understood and how you're able to express it as well.
Yeah. So what is your definition of inclusion?
Well, my definition of inclusion, really is impacted by having a son with a disability and having him be in special education. And, my view of inclusion is creating an environment that is accepting and encouraging to a person who might learn differently or might
Hmm.
present differently, whether it's physical or um, something intellectually different. So
Hmm.
finding ways for them to participate in that, what the general ed population in that community, right?
Right.
And my son, he plays basketball at the YMCA, And they're so great with inclusion for him there because
Okay.
they know he has a disability, but he's been playing basketball there for a good 4 or 5 years now.
Okay.
And all the refs know him too. The referees know when he gets the ball, give him some space. He can dribble the basketball, and he can shoot the ball, but you do need to give him a little extra time,
Yep.
and give him a little space. And so finding ways for him to participate in everyday things is what I think inclusion is from my standpoint.
Yeah.
And I hope that other children who have disabilities or differences,
Hmm.
whether it be physical or intellectual, are able to find that kind of inclusion in their community or school as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. So do you, so for my daughter, she had speech, and there's the component where they would pull her out, take her to the speech room, do some stuff with her there, and then there was somewhere that they would come, speech would come into the classroom and work with her. Can you kind of maybe go into like what's the advantages and disadvantages of like each place, like learning speech related things, like in the speech room versus like in the classroom?
Absolutely. So when you're taking a child into the speech room, you're usually trying to teach something very specific. Maybe introduce a new topic or
Mm-hmm.
a new idea, a new strategy, something that they maybe haven't learned or haven't had time to practice very much
Mm-hmm.
with. And when you then take it into the classroom, that's when you're starting to generalize it. So you're taking that strategy you tried to teach implicitly, like in a very specific way, and you take it and into an environment where they can apply those strategies or those ideas, learn
Mm-hmm.
topics into now their daily environment of the classroom.
Okay.
And hopefully there's communication happening
Right.
between the teacher and the teacher assistants and maybe even some of the students that are in the classroom as well on how to help that child work on these strategies, whether it's conversations, whether it
Right.
is sequencing, whether it is problem solving. It's like what kinds of things can that environment, the people in that environment of the classroom, be helpful for
Yeah.
in helping that student generalize that strategy or new learned skill.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Um, so we hear, I mean, I've heard a lot recently about just schools just can't find enough speech language pathologists. Is there like a shortage right now,
There
generally?
has there has always been a shortage.
Okay.
There's as far as I've known, when I went to grad school, I was approached by the Department of Education saying, if you work for us for 3 years, we will give you a stipend for school
Hmm.
because they were so short
So
staffed.
short.
They
Okay.
they were outsourcing their speech
Yep.
therapists, which costs a lot of money. And so I think historically there has been a shortage of speech therapists.
Hmm.
And I've never, people say, you write this book, aren't you afraid that you're going to be out of a job? And I go, no, I will never be out of a job.
Right.
There are always people asking, do you want to take on a new job? Do you want to, you get my email box is like full of job
Hmm.
inquiries. Do you want to work here? You want to work there? So there's always a shortage of speech therapists in the schools and in the hospitals. Every aspect where a speech therapist might work, there's a
Hmm.
shortage.
Yeah.
Um, that's not like an excuse for why
Right.
kids don't get the therapy that they should. There's no excuse for that, right? So
Yeah.
when I was working part-time in the school district here, I was working 3 days a week and I had 52 kids.
Holy cow.
So an average of 52 kids, like,
That's
sometimes
a
it'd be a
lot.
little less, a little more.
Right.
And I had to push into the classroom a lot of times.
Yep.
I would pull out. So like a lot of kids would have twice a week. So I would
Yep.
pull them out for one day and I would push in for one day. I'd have to have creative groups,
Yep.
grouping all the kids that have similar goals. So it's a lot of creative therapy because you have this high caseload of kids, but
Right.
you want to address all of their needs. So what is the best way to do that is to think outside the box, and
Yeah.
you have to have that communication with the
Right.
teachers and
Yep.
with, a lot of kids have one-on-ones or adult support
Yep.
people, having communication and training with them, because I am one person, but I want them to be able to, that child to be able to work on those strategies throughout their whole school day.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
The other part, I feel like the speech language pieces for sure. I mean, if like you guys are working on it at school, I mean, it's probably beneficial for the family to be doing similar things at home, correct?
Absolutely.
So then, how do you normally communicate then with like the parents? Do you like sit them down, or you kind of how do you communicate? Like we're working on this at school. This is how you should be, approaching it at home. How do you
Absolutely.
speak?
So you want to make sure that you have some kind of communication with the
Mm,
parents, whether it's email, whether it's a notebook that
right.
you write in. I work with a lot of kids because I'm working early intervention. I'm working with a lot of preschool kids,
Sure.
and so I'll text the parents, or when the
Yeah.
kids are at drop off, I'll communicate with the parents that
Okay.
way. I will send home homework and leave it on their sign-in sheet, for the
Sure.
preschool,
Yeah.
and then I'll follow up with a text message saying, "This is what I sent home. This is
Yeah.
how you should work on it." Or I'll do like a simple video and then send that home with the parents so
Yeah.
they can see what the strategies are. But it is so important to include the parents as part
Right.
of the therapy team,
Yeah.
because therapy should not happen in isolation. It should not happen by itself. It
Mm-hmm.
needs to be work and taught, intrinsically to the child, but you also have to do the training with all the staff that work with the child, even work with the peers sometimes, and letting them know,
Mm-hmm.
like, hey, this person might need a little extra time, when to play, to react to something that
Yes.
you say. Or, hey, I have a kid right now, he's in second grade, and I've worked with him since he was 2.5, and I've seen him grow so much, but he just needs
Yeah.
a little extra help on the playground. So I have a lot of, sometimes I'll tell their friend, hey, why don't you ask so and so if they want to play? So I'll bring
Mm-hmm.
in the peer helpers to have that initiation, because he just needs a little extra encouragement that
Yeah.
way. So it's so important to have a great surrounding team around the child. So it's the peers, it's the staff, it's the parents, and they all play such a great role in helping to nurture and develop these strategies that we're trying to teach them.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense because we had some times where it would, they're trying to do something at school and we wouldn't really know. There wasn't good communication, so we're not doing the same thing at home. And I'm like, I feel like you need to do it in both places so we're being consistent. They're not, she's not learning one strategy at school, which we aren't using at home. So it's like an only a school thing. So that's very important for sure.
Yeah, I
Uh,
will say that in an ideal world, this is how it should be, right? Like how
right, for sure.
the communication should happen. But in reality, there is a lack of communication,
Yeah.
right? Because even my son who gets these therapies, I need to be a little bit more pushy about getting
Yeah.
communication, but I still don't get communication from his therapist at school. Like, what are your names? What are you
Right.
working on? Are you
Yeah.
working on the goals? Like, send home homework, like whatever it is. So in an ideal world, yes, you have this great
Yeah.
team, but not every case is that way. And
For
unfortunately,
sure.
it's not. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, like you're saying, I feel like from my experience as well, I've had to be the one asking questions to find out what's happening sometimes, and I'm not sure where that comes from, but it's just, and sometimes when you're the parent, like I am and you are, just I don't want to be the one having to like ask questions or why are we, like pushing buttons or like pushing it a little bit, but that I feel like sometimes you just have to. So I mean, I'm her dad. I'm gonna ask questions if I have them or if something doesn't seem right. So that's just the way it goes, I guess.
I think you need to.
Yeah.
You shouldn't have to,
Right.
but as a parent, you need to, because who's going to if
Yep.
you aren't? So.
Yeah. What are top strategies parents can start implementing with their young children today to help with language development?
Oh, absolutely. This is what my book is about, right? So
Yeah.
it's about uh, from early when they're a baby, just having that energy exchange of
Hmm.
playing with the child, singing with the child, reading to the child. Reading so important, but making faces, just being silly and animated is really, really important.
Sure.
Having them know that you are a part of their world,
Hmm.
right? Not that they are a part of ours, but we are, the main thing is that they know that we are there to communicate with them. They're
Sure.
not, they aren't meant to, babies aren't meant to be quiet.
Yeah.
When people say, oh, children are supposed to be quiet. No, children are supposed to be, having fun and
Yeah.
communicating. So reading is super important, clapping out those syllables. And like I said, and also, a child doesn't know vocabulary until it's is presented to them.
Yeah.
So if you're going to be asking things like, what do you want to eat? But they don't know what they want to eat. You got to show them, do you want to have the banana or the apple? Show them
Okay.
those two things. Do you want to have the cookie or the cracker? Do you want to drink the milk or the juice?
Hmm.
And so they are seeing it, they're hearing it. And then if they're looking at one of them, then you can give them those words, because until, the language develops and they're able to speak, they're not going to be able to say anything, but
Right.
you can speak as if you are them. Like,
Sure.
oh, I want to eat the cracker. Yum, 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 yum. And, it can be very playful. Like,
Right.
oh, this cracker is delicious. So just be playful. Return to being a kid and don't worry about what anybody thinks. Like, be as silly and animated with your child, because they will learn from you. They will imitate you.
Yeah. When our daughter was for sure, I don't remember if we did it with our son, but started teaching her like simple signs when she was younger. Is that something? Is that a good strategy also? Like simple sign language before they can speak?
Yeah, your simple signs are definitely very helpful. Like I'm not fluent in sign
Yeah.
language at all, but very basic things like more or
Yeah.
please or thank you or eat or drink. Those are great things to accompany your
Okay.
verbal, right?
Sure.
So they can also, they hear it, they visualize the sign for more,
Hmm.
and then they associate, oh, I can use this sign before I can speak, to communicate as my words.
Yeah. That's awesome. What is one tip you can share to help our listeners be more inclusive today? Just something simple that they can just start doing today.
I would definitely say, have a different, open your mind up and have a different perspective,
Hmm.
right? Because we see the world in one way. And if we can have the ability to try to see the world from the person with a disability or a difference, how they might feel, then we'll create a greater empathy and
Hmm.
understanding and acceptance. I think that's really, really important.
Yeah, that's great. Is there anything you want to talk about that we haven't discussed?
Um, I think that one thing I want to mention
Sure.
is, one chapter I wrote is, no child's ever died of crying,
Okay.
as far as we know, and
As far as you know.
as far as we know, and as parents, we don't want our child to be, you know, uncomfortable or
Right.
upset or cry. We never want to hear a child cry, but crying is part of communication, and it is okay for a child to cry a little bit, because you want them to communicate. That is part
Hmm.
of how they are able to indicate they want something or need something. And there's this very fine line of a child's unable to do something and then a child is able to do something, right? So
Right.
I would never tell a baby to get up and walk, but I might encourage them to move their body. I might encourage them to get in a position where they can maybe get on their hands and knees, and eventually that will lead to crawling, and eventually, you teach them how to pull themselves up, and eventually they can learn to stand by themselves, and eventually they can start taking their first steps. So it's the same thing like language, right? So if you have a child who cannot speak, you want to work on the strategies to get him to vocalize or babble, and
Sure.
then to imitate vocalizations, imitate something similar to words, and eventually they'll start speaking. So when I say it's okay for a child to cry, like one example is when my niece was, I think she was like 2, and she had words. She could speak.
Hmm.
She could do things for herself, but she didn't want to feed herself. And my brother was very, very busy, and he had to go somewhere. And I said, I'll stay home with her. We can work together. We're going to feed ourselves.
Yep.
And so she did not want to feed herself. I said, you can feed yourself. He had cut up this peanut butter and jelly sandwich into little squares, very manageable for her to do it.
Hmm.
And I was like, feed yourself. And she would go, she would cry. And I go, okay. I was like, well, you can go in your timeout corner, and when you're ready, come back.
Hmm.
And then she calmed down. I said, okay, come back. Okay, feed yourself. She would cry. I said, okay, go back. If you're not ready,
Yep.
you'll sit down. And this went on for a bit. But I was like, no, you are going to feed you're very capable. It wasn't something that she couldn't do. Right.
Right.
So there's that line where they can't do something, but
Yep.
she definitely crossed that line where she's able to do it. She
Right.
just didn't want to do
Yeah,
it.
for sure.
So I think that when children are able to use their words or able to do something, but they just don't want to do it, and it's just easier to give in and be like, okay, they cried. Here's whatever you wanted.
Yeah.
I think that's when, as parents and teachers and caregivers, we really need to take a look at
Right.
are we perpetuating this ability for them to cry and be tended to, or are we helping them? Let them cry, let them work a little bit harder,
Right.
but actually develop them into being a more independent person. So
Yeah. That's great
that's
reminders. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that part. Ready for the last question?
yes.
Do you eat Spam? Yes or no?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
I figured based on that you used to live in Hawaii, that was going to be a fast yes. So yeah, I asked that question because I live in Austin, Minnesota, where they make Spam and where the Spam Museum is located. So if you ever want to visit the Spam Museum, you have to come to Austin, Minnesota.
I did not know that.
Yep.
I did not know that. Growing up, there was only one flavor of Spam. And now there are so many different flavors of Spam. It is
Yeah.
quite remarkable. I really have not tried the other flavors.
Yeah, me either.
But I definitely love a Spam musubi, which is like Spam sushi, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've never had that. Had it like that. We just usually fry it up, or slice it and fry it up is usually how I eat it. But yeah. So yeah,
Yeah.
the Spam Museum is in Austin. It's really cool. They have a lot of history about Spam. They pass out Spamples, they call them. So a person's walking around with a tray with like little chunks of Spam with a pretzel stick in it, and I think I did try like some kind of a spicy version when I went there because that's what they were passing out that day. But yeah, it's pretty fun. So
Interesting. I don't know if I would do Spam with a pretzel stick. That just seems a little bit odd. But Spam and rice. Spam
there
and
you
rice and some eggs
Yeah.
next time you try it out. Do you
There
like
you go.
do you like teriyaki?
Yeah.
So my mom taught me this very simple recipe. You just mix equal parts of soy sauce, sugar, and water,
Okay.
and then you kind of fry the Spam in
Oh,
that
that
until it
sounds
kind
pretty
of
good.
coagulates a little
Sure.
bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really, really, really good.
There you go. Where is the best place for everybody to connect with you?
They can find me on my website. It's called playdumandsabotage.com.
Okay. Great. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. To all of you listening, thank you for joining us on this episode of the Inclusive Dad Podcast. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please subscribe, rate, or review the show. Your feedback helps us connect with more champions of inclusion. Remember to share this podcast with friends and family who might benefit. If you want to support us in our mission, please click on the link in the show description. Together we can make the world more inclusive. Until next time, stay empowered and be a champion for inclusion.